everyone, thanks for coming. I'm CJ Farley. I appreciate you guys coming in here to hear me talk about my book, Game World. It's the first book I've ever written for younger readers. I got two kids myself, a daughter who's 8, a son who just turned 12, and they're into sports, they're into reading, and one thing I thought would be cool is I wrote a lot of adult books. I figured, let me write a book that my kids can read, that I can read with them as well. Here's some of the past books I've written. A book called Kingston by Starlight, a book about pirates in the Caribbean in the 18th century. I came from Jamaica, and so I wanted to write a book that sort of dealt with some history that my grandparents used to talk about. I wrote this book called Before the Legend, The Rise of Bob Marley, a book about Bob Marley. I'm going to pass this around. Take a look at it. I wrote a book called Aaliyah. Anyone know who Aaliyah is? Yes. Yeah, so before she died, I actually used to work, I'm now a senior editor at the Wall Street Journal. Anyone know what the Wall Street Journal is? So it's a newspaper that primarily covers business news, but I cover cultural news there. And before that, I was the music critic at Time Magazine. And at Time Magazine, I interviewed all sorts of people, everyone from Beyonce to Aaliyah, and which only goes to A to B actually. But anyway, you know my point. And so I interviewed Aaliyah shortly before she died in a plane crash, and it was so, just disturbing to me that I ended up writing a book about it that actually is going to be made into a movie very soon by Lifetime Television. I'm going to pass around this book. And I wrote this book also called The Blues, and director Martin Scorsese, a guy who's done a lot of movies that you may not, you're probably too young to see, he asked me to collaborate with him on this book, The Blues. He did a PBS miniseries on blues, and he wanted me to co-write the companion volume for it. So this is the book, I'm going to pass it around to you. Now, when I was a kid, one thing that I loved was fantasy fiction. Anyone know what movie that's from? How about you right there? The Hobbit, that's right, from The Hobbit. One of my favorite books, J.R. Tolkien wrote it. I just love that book. I read The Hobbit, I read The Lord of the Rings. I read all those books. Okay, anyone guess what book that's from? How about way in the back there? You, that's right, you. Yes. That's right, The Chronicles of Narnia. Another book that I loved as a kid. I got into it, I read all the Chronicles of Narnia. I read some of C.S. Lewis's other books too. But one thing that struck me about those books is that most of them drew on the myths of old Europe. Dragons and knights and lords and ladies. And I love that stuff, and I've visited Europe, I love visiting Europe. But I thought, wouldn't it be cool to write a book that drew on the myths of, instead of the old world, of this in the new world, America and the Caribbean and where I hail from, and that had kids in the book that looked like the kids in my kids' classrooms. And so that's one reason I decided to write Game World, to sort of give people something different to read about, to think about, and that's how I ended up with this book, Game World. It's another one of my books I'm passing around, Aaliyah. That's one of my earlier books. I also wrote a book on Halle Berry. Anyone know who Halle Berry is? Yes. And, who is she? She's an actress, and she's also the first black woman to ever win the Academy Award for Best Actress. She also plays Storm in what? Oh, the X-Men. Right, the X-Men. Wow. And so I interviewed her and wrote a book about her as well, one of my earlier books before I wrote Game World. The book before The Legend that I wrote about Bob Marley. And that's where I hail from. Now, who wants to come up here to the front and try to find where Jamaica is? Who wants to try? How about you right there with the backpack? Can you come up here? Don't trip on the wires there. It's an old-time map from the 18th century. It sort of shows the Americas and the Caribbean. I want you to see if you can find where Jamaica is on that map. You can point it out. Where's Jamaica? Very close. I'll give you a hint. It's kind of a different color. You're getting warmer. A little farther in. A little farther in. You're almost there. Up, up. Go to the middle. Go to the middle. It's yellow. Look. You see a yellow island there? That's Jamaica. Very close though. So that's where I hail from, Jamaica, an island in the Caribbean. Thanks a lot. Part of the Americas. And when I was growing up, my grandmother used to tell me all kinds of stories about monsters, about duppies, about creatures that go bump in the night. And I thought, someday I'm going to write a book about that. And so I wrote a book about the pirate tales she used to tell me about. And later on, I thought I'm going to write the book Game World, which deals more with some of the things that she used to talk about. I want to pause for a second to give you a taste of some of the music, the music of Jamaica. And let's see if you can identify some of it. Okay, let's see if anyone can tell me who this is. You can hear it. Who was that? That's right, Bob Marley. That's reggae. That's part of the culture of Jamaica. It's one thing I drew on to write my book. Say something else. Right, everyone knows that song. Okay, did anyone see Tessian Chin win the voice? Yes. She's someone else that hails from Jamaica and sang the song Many Rivers to Cross from a very famous Jamaican movie called The Harder They Come. We'll play a little bit of this just to give you a sense of what the culture of Jamaica is like and what I was drawing from to write this book. Sort of soft in here, but you can get it. So that's a sense of some of the culture of Jamaica, where I come from, what this book's about. Now, in writing a book, and people always say don't judge a book by the cover, but everybody judges books by the cover. I mean, when you go into a bookstore, or when you're searching online, the first thing you do is you check out the cover. Does it appeal to you? Are you going to buy it? So I went through many different covers, crossed many different rivers before I arrived at the cover that I did. But first, a cartoonist friend of mine decided, hey, I can do a cover for you, and he did that cover there. Those are the main characters, Ines, Dylan, Eli. Those are some various Jamaican monsters behind them. That's Emma, a little girl who's sort of one of the key parts of the story. There's a giant spider who's a key part of the story. And so I really liked that cover, but I thought, let me try again. What do you guys think of that cover? You like that cover? Okay. Maybe I'll put it on another edition. So I tried that cover out, and then I said, let me try again. So a friend of mine who I went to school with, who's an illustrator and artist, Young Janim, hails in South Korea, he said he'd do a cover for me, and he sketched out this cover first. So a more realistic look at the book, with the same characters, Dylan, Ines, Eli, sort of coming into a fantasy landscape. So I really liked that sketch. I said, go ahead, do the whole thing. And so that's what he ended up doing. And that's the final art that we used for the book. I thought it really sort of captured Jamaica. It captured the fantasy aspects I was looking for. It captured the various characters in the book. And so after weeks and months of sort of searching, we finally arrived at the cover that I used for Game World. Now, every book has to have characters, and characters that sort of bring people in. And so one of the characters in my book is named Dylan. He has the power to sort of turn into this kind of Jamaican ghost, who's called a duppy, and that's a drawing of that. And that's the character there, Dylan. Now, I wanted to sort of do kind of a live reading of this book, and to do that, I'm going to need some of your help. So I'm going to need one of you to sort of play one of these characters and read from it. Now, who there thinks they can play this character, Dylan? Who there can read this book? It'll be a very short reading. Who can read Dylan? Who can try? Hey, anyone want to try? Give me boy a drop. You're brave, you can do it. Great. Can you go in front? Thanks. Stand right there for now. All right. Okay. You come to the front. Okay, can you find page 145 in here? Okay, there's another character. So Dylan is a kid who's around your age. He loves to skateboard. He sort of has some problems in school paying attention, but the one thing he does best is he plays video games. He's a great video game player. And in the book, he plays a video game called Jamaican. And the video game turns out to be real, and he gets sucked into the world of the video game, and so does his sister, and he has to go hunting through the magical world and try to find her. And he's accompanied by a couple friends. One of his friends is a giant spider who likes to, called Nesta. And in Jamaica, spiders are kind of an important character in the mythology of Jamaica. There's a spider called the Nancy, you may have heard of, trickster spider. He's famous in African myth too, but also in Jamaican myth. And so Nesta kind of draws him. He's kind of a trickster, he's a fun guy, and he helps out Dylan. Who here thinks they can read Nesta's part? Who wants to try that? No? No? Come on. You can read that one part. Okay, back there. Can you come up here and try that? Come on up. All right. Thanks a lot. So, okay, 145. Let's turn to 145. Okay. Ines is the daughter of the guy who actually created the video game. She's sort of a rich, privileged girl, and she sort of learns a lesson about that wealth isn't everything during the course of the book. Who here thinks they can read this character's part? Can you try? Come on up. We got 145. We're going to start in a second. Okay. And Eli is another character in the book. He is in a wheelchair. He has muscular problems. He can't really walk. But the one thing he's really good at is he's a champion hacker. He's one of the best hackers at school. He's always breaking into people's computers, getting passwords, getting phone records. That's kind of what he does. And he accompanies Dylan on his journey into Jamaica. Who here can read Eli's part? Can you try? Come on up. All right, so turn to page 145. Okay, and we're going to start. I'm going to read the narration part, and when you guys see, you come closer to the microphone. I'm going to read the narration part, and when you get to parts that have your characters' names, Eli, Ines, Nesta, and Eli, you read those quotes, okay? We start page 145, top of the page, on the very top. What's happened in the book here is Dylan and his friends have been sucked into this magical world of Jamaica. Kind of like Narnia, kind of like Middle Earth, but only it's more Jamaican. He's looking for his little sister, Emma, who's also lost somewhere in this world, but they encounter all these horrible creatures that are sort of standing in their way of finding her. Okay, so they've spent the night at this hut, and they've woken up and found they're in terrible danger. And we're going to start right there. A few hours later, Ines came over to the boys' side of the hut. Dylan, still thinking about his father, was wide awake.
Whoa, what's going on? It must be 3 in the morning.
She opened the door.
You might want to take a look at this.
Eli and Dylan peeked out the door. The townspeople were all lined up outside. Their eyes were white. Their skin was drawn and gray. They weren't plant people now. They seemed more like husks. They were zombies.
Yes?
What?
Now would be a good time to tell them I told you so.
The townspeople's zombies were singing again, but this time it was angry and menacing, like the chanting of pissed-off monks. Serafina stood in front of the zombies. Fire blazed from her eyes, and her hair was also aflame. In one swift move, she pulled off all her skin, like a lady slipping off a leather glove. Now she was a body of pure fire.
That's wrong on so many levels.
Nesta.
Now I am actually, she's a
Asukiya.
Sukia?
Yeah.
Sukia.
Asuka, who?
She's, like by day and by night. And by night she slips up from her skin and becomes a flesh-eating plant.
So she's like a creepy vine, a human weed.
Dude, your girlfriend grows on people. Literally.
Next up.
Oh, it gets worse with month. If you eat her food and fall asleep, she enslaves you. She turns the town into zombies.
Seraphina now seemed more plant than human. Her mouth and hands look like Venus flytraps, with yawning openings and spiky fringes. Ivy-like tendrils of fire curled around her, writhing and twisting. They snaked out from her body towards the townsfolk, twisting around their limbs and torsos as well. The whole community seemed linked in some viney, creepy, awful way, and the Sukiyant was at the center of it. Tongues of flame shot out around her ivy-entwined form.
Eli, your hand.
Eli looked at his hand. It was sprouting tiny leaves.
Did you eat that fruit?
So,
Did you fall asleep? Absolutely not.
Now fingers in his left hand were twisting and fusing together like rolls of Play-Doh.
okay, I may have gotten off.
Yeah, I think we figured that one out.
Pinocchio.
Sorry.
Soon the hand had turned green and brown and looked like a leafy vine.
That thing out, that thing out of here is behind us.
Come on.
And did I mention?
Oh, and did I mention Sukiya shoot fireball?
I've heard of a hot date, but this is just stupid.
Dylan closed the door.
Less talking, more running.
Where? There's only one exit.
How about the air vent? That's what people do in action movies.
What part of we're in a hut did you not understand?
Inez pulled a thick black glove out of her I got your backpack.
There's this.
What's that?
And I'm going to end there. Thanks a lot. Great reading. Put your hands up. Great reading. Perfect. Thanks. Zero. Thank you. One more hand. They really brought the book to life. Let's give other hands for our readers. Now, one thing I like to do is I want everyone to have a piece of paper. You can pass this out to everybody. It just passes around. So everyone gets it's one sheet of paper. Thank you. Now, one thing, when you're writing a book, all those voices are in your head. You hear the characters talking, and you just try to write it down. If a book is really working, if you really feel like a book if you really feel inspired by writing the book, it's almost like you're transcribing dialogue and writing it down rather than coming up with it. And that's how I felt when I was writing the book. And I worked with an artist on this book, Young Janim, who drew all the creatures in the book. That's one of the plant creatures there. And one essential part of writing a fantasy book is being able to imagine the pictures in your head. Being able to see these things so you can write down and describe what they're like. And we're going to pass up these pens too. Everyone doesn't have, if you have a pen, if you don't, please take one of these. More pens. If you have your own pen, use it. Otherwise, I'm going to share pens. And in the passage we just read, there was a creature described. I'm going to read that passage again, and I want you to take the pen, take the paper, and draw what you imagine that creature looks like. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to read the passage that describes the monster in the book. And I want you, with your pen, with your paper, to make a drawing of what you think it looks like. It can be a sketch, it can be a fully realized drawing, whatever you really want to do. You saw the way the artist who did the book kind of did a sketch first before he did a finished drawing. So I want you to do the same thing here. Just do a sketch of what you see in your head when I read this passage. Okay. The townspeople zombies were singing again, but this time it was angry and menacing, like the chanting of pissed-off monks. Zarafina, that's a monster, stood in front of the zombies. Fire blazed from her eyes, and her hair was also aflame. In one swift move, she pulled off all her skin like a lady slipping off a leather glove. Now she was a body of pure fire. And they go on to write, Zarafina now seemed more plant than human. Her mouth and hands looked like Venus flytraps, with yawning openings and spiky finger fringes. Ivy-like tendrils of fire curled around her, writhing and twisting. They snaked out from her body towards the townsfolk, twisting around their limbs and torsos as well. The whole community seemed linked in some viney, creepy, awful way, and the Sukuyan was at the center of it. Tongues of flame shot out around her ivy-entwined form. So that's what I imagined when I wrote this book. That's a creature that I sort of came up with. Now, we're going to pause for a few seconds here. I want you to sort of draw what you think it looks like. And be sure to sign your drawing. That's another important thing. You got to sign your drawings. So, what do you think that creature looks like? That's an important thing you get to do when you're an artist, when you're a writer. You come up with these creatures, you come up with these settings, and you have to be able to sort of picture them in your mind. And artists, sometimes in books, will actually draw a picture of them in print. But I want you to sort of imagine what I just said and write it down. So take a moment here and try to draw what you think that looks like. Read it one last time. The townspeople, zombies, were singing again, but this time it was angry and menacing with the chanting of pissed-off monks. Zarafina stood in front of the zombies. Fire blazed from her eyes, and her hair was also aflame. In one swift move, she pulled off all her skin like a lady slipping off a leather glove. Now she was a body of pure fire. Zarafina seemed more plant than human. Her mouth and hands looked like Venus flytraps with yawning openings and spiky fringes. Ivy-like tendrils of fire curled around her, writhing and twisting. They snaked out from her body towards the townsfolk, twisting around their limbs and torsos as well. The whole community seemed linked in some viney, creepy, awful way, and the Sukuyan was at the center of it. Tongues of flame shot out around her ivy-entwined form. So that's the passage. And try to draw what that looks like. Does anyone have a sketch? I know it's quick, but anyone have a sketch they want to show me? Let's see your sketch. And what's your name? Jade? Jaden, okay.
No, Jade.
Take a look. All right. So I just read about this creature that's in my book, and this is what, is it Jaden? Jade. That's what Jade came up with. I like this. You got the creepy eyes. You got the mouth. You got the tendrils down there. This looks like something you might not want to see in a nightmare. So I like this. The one mistake you made is you didn't sign your work. You got to sign your work. Take credit for it. But good job. Excellent job. I like your drawing. Anyone else have a drawing they want to show me? All right. And what's your name? Cheyenne? Cheyenne. Great. Cheyenne. Great. So Cheyenne drew this. And did she sign it? Yes, she did. And can't see it. You got the creepy eyes. You got the hair of flame. You got the Venus flytrap hands. That's great. You got some tendrils reaching down here. Again, you would not want to meet this creature in a dark alley in New York City. So it definitely worked for fantasy. Excellent job, Cheyenne. Thank you. All right. I like this one. Who did this one? Samia. All right. Samia signed it. This is Samia's drawing. Now, I think it's a special kind of talent to draw something or write something or do anything creative that gets a reaction out of people. Whether it's horror, whether it's a laugh, whether it's just concentration. So the fact that you have to get a reaction is really, really a great thing. It's very tough to get any kind of reaction out of people when you're doing something artistic. And you can draw, this is great. I like the fire around here. The eyes are kind of creepy. The Venus flytrap hands. Very, very strong image. You did a good job of putting my words into a picture. Good job. Yes, let's see yours. All right. And your name is? Diane. This is Diane. I like this. It's a little bit abstract, which I like. You got the creepy eyes. You got the mouth. You got the tendrils wrapped all around. Very good job of turning prose into a picture. Excellent job. All right. And whose is this? Ashande. Ashande. One more time. Ashade. Okay, great, Ashade. Terrific. I like that you got the sort of the form there. You got the hair all over the place. You got the eyes. You got the dangerous Venus flytrap hands. Very nice. All right. Okay. We're gonna do one more. Okay, this is great. Got multiple hands here. Got the eyes, the tendrils here, the hair of flame. Really captured the words. And who's this guy? Carleon. Thank you, Carleon. All right. So that's a little bit about turning prose into pictures. So that's part of what I did to write Game World. Now, how long do you think it took me to write this book? 7 years? You guys are too smart, you know the answers. Yeah, it took me 7 years to write this book. Now, not every book takes that long to write. The book I did on Aaliyah took me, guess how long?
2 months.
That's right, it took me 3 months, very close. Yeah, it took me 3 months to write, and actually that's the best-selling book I've ever done. So, how long you work on a book doesn't necessarily correlate to how well the book does, but if you want to do anything right, sometimes it takes a long time. You know, it took me 7 years because I wanted to get feedback from kids. My son read the book and gave me feedback. My daughter looked at the book and gave me feedback. Their friends read the book and gave me feedback on it. And I changed things based on what they had to say. And sometimes they'd say, hey, a kid wouldn't say that. Or, no, I think kid motivation would be this. And I took all those things and rewrote the book. But finally, you know, in the end, it had to be me to decide, okay, this works. Here's the story. Here's what we want to do. So it took me 7 years to finish it. But, you know, all worked out because the book is done. It's in stores. I got on the Today Show to talk about it. And now I'm here to talk to you about it. So in the end, the hard work sort of all paid off. So it's a good lesson for you if you want to do anything. You know, whether it's you know, being in medicine, whether it's being a writer, whether it's being an athlete, whether it's being an architect. Sometimes the end might not be in sight. You might have to do things for years, for a decade, before you actually get any kind of payoff or realize your dream. But if you believe in it, if you think what you're doing really works, if you're really into it, you're getting positive feedback from people that you respect, it's worth putting in all that work, it's worth putting in all those years, because in the end product is something you're really, really proud of. So that's the end of my slideshow. And I want to know if you had any questions for me about writing the book about Game World. Yes. And say your name, please.
My name.
Okay.
My question was, why did you give the explanation for the children that the mother, Dylan, and the mother was dead in a plane crash, but she actually not dead?
Yeah. The question was, why did I create the impression that Dylan's mother was dead when actually she was really alive in the game, something you find out at the end of the book. And, you know, that builds up tension. You know, obviously, you know, when you're a kid and you've lost a mother or a father, that's the worst thing you can go through. Nothing's worse than not having one of your parents leaving you or dying or somehow not having one. That can be tough to deal with. Some people deal with it and turn out terrific. It's just something you overcome and have a fantastic life. And that's what I wanted to show, that Dylan, although he lacked a parent, he was still able to sort of have these adventures, become a great kid, and go on and have a terrific life. And after he sort of learned his lessons, after he's had all these adventures, in the end, he actually, it turns out his parent was there all along, is able to connect with it. So there's some tension built up throughout the story. But I wanted to show that it's possible to sort of overcome those hurdles when you lack a parent, when you sort of when you lack a mother or a father. It's a barrier you can overcome and have a great life. Does that make sense? Great. Yes, back there. Yes, you. Yes, you. Yeah. What's your name? Okay.
Were you like any of the characters when you were like little kids?
Was I like any of the characters? I think I was probably like all the characters. And people always ask me, which character are you most like? I'm probably like all of them, because all of them kind of represent one part of my personality. I mean, Dylan is kind of fun-loving, into video games and basketball, and that's what I was like as a kid. I was into video games and basketball, and my son's into video games and basketball, so it kind of reflects them. The Emma character, kind of like my daughter. She's very, very smart. She's very, very tall. She's always sort of coming up with good questions. So, but also that's kind of like me too. So the characters represent some people that I know, but they also represent parts of my personality too. Good question. Yes.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book that I've ever written? My favorite book is always the book I just finished, because I feel like I poured all of my life into it, and I've done the best I could, and I drew on lessons that I learned from writing my other books. So my favorite book right now really is Game World, but when I finished my other books, I felt like those were my favorites too. I think once you finish your last book, you feel like, okay, I've done the best I can, and so I'm really proud of it. How about that? Yes?
Do you have any advice for aspiring writers?
Advice for aspiring writers. Here's my advice. It's a good idea to join any kind of group that's about writing. When I was in school, when I was your age, I actually started my own newspaper. In middle school and high school, I started my own papers just because I wanted to write. I wanted to have an outlet for doing that, and the school didn't have a newspaper. When I got to college, I ended up joining the college newspaper, ended up joining the college humor magazine. I got an internship at the Boston Globe, then an internship at the Chicago Tribune, and then I ended up writing for USA Today. And all those things sort of helped me with my writing. So if you want to write, don't just sort of sit in a room and think, I want to write. Go out there and meet other writers. Join writing groups. Get feedback. Meet writing professors and teachers. And all of that will help you along the way to learn how to write. Back there?
How do you know what name best fits in your story?
One more time?
How do you know what name best fits into your story?
Oh, how do I know what name? For the characters or for the whole book?
For the character.
For the characters. How do I come up with a name for the characters? You know what? I changed some of the names. I came up with some names and I changed them. And I named the lead character Dylan after my son. I have a son named Dylan. And I was going to change it to something else because it was only there as a marker. That's when I was writing the rough version. I thought I'll use the name Dylan for now and change it to something else. But then I was getting ready to change it because the character really isn't completely like my son. He has some other issues that my son doesn't have. And my son didn't want me to change the book, so he didn't want me to change the name. And all the kids that I named characters after didn't want me to change the name. So I left some of the names in there that were named after characters of kids I actually knew. Yes?
I wanted to ask, I see that throughout the book, you describe the challenges that they face, like bullying and about their parents that they look at on and they're poor and they're about to get evicted and if they don't come up with money. So Dylan, he tries to grow and he tries to help. But what inspired you to write about the challenges that they go through and, you know?
Yeah, those are good questions. I mean, one reason why I dealt with the challenges of money, of bullying, because those things I've seen in my own life. I mean, when I was a kid growing up in upstate New York, in Brockport, New York, anyone know where Brockport is? Yeah, well, back when I was growing up, and this was happened in the 60s, and actually this was like the 70s. In the 70s, when I was a kid, around your age, there was a lot of racial taunting. It was a mostly white school, and so I was always getting into fights with kids who call me like the N-word. And it's always something that, it's something that's tough for kids to deal with when kids call you racial names. So, if someone called me that name, I'd feel a need to fight them. You shouldn't fight top today because you'll get kicked out of school. But back then, got in fights all the time. And so I thought, let me write a book about this, because I know kids are going through that. They're being bullied at school. They're being taunted to get into fights. It's tough to deal with. I went through it. So I wanted to sort of put that into my book. I mean, things are better. at that school I went to now, it's completely changed. I remember senior year when I was in school, things had changed so much from middle school when someone called me the N-word. All the other kids in my basketball team, and then I went after school to fight this kid who called me the word. All the kids in my basketball team, who were mostly white, they showed up to fight the kid too. So if things have changed where everyone knew you shouldn't use that kind of language and that racial taunts like that weren't good. So it's good to see that kind of change, but I wanted to sort of capture some of the emotions that I went through in the book. Yes?
What inspired you to become an author?
That's a great question. What inspired me to become an author? Well, I've always liked to write from when I was a young age. And when I was in school, I went to Harvard. Anyone know where Harvard is? Yeah. So I went to Harvard, and I was on an outfit called the Harvard Lampoon. The Harvard Lampoon is in a big castle. It's a humor magazine. People there to sit around and crack jokes all day, and they try to write funny stories. And I was really inspired by this sort of community of people who all loved writing, who all loved cracking jokes. Many of them went on to write for like David Letterman and Seth Meyers and Saturday Night Live. And so being around people who were so into writing helped inspire me to become a writer too. Yes? What inspired me to write this book? Well, one reason I wrote this book is what I told you coming in, is that I love J.R.R. Tolkien, I love C.S. Lewis, I love all those fantasy books, but I didn't see a whole lot of people of color in those books. And I thought, well, what is a fantasy? Is a fantasy to imagine a world where we're not there? And so I thought, that's not right. Let me write a book to try to integrate Fantasyland instead of put people that I know that look like me, that look like kids in my kids' school, into this world. Let me draw on some of the myths that I heard growing up from my grandparents and put them into a story. So that's one reason I wrote the book. How about back, right there?
What is the story behind the title? Like, why did you name it Game On?
That's a very good question. You know, the original title for this book was actually The Game Changers. And so it was going to be The Game Changers or Game World. And actually, my book publisher was also publishing another book just called Changers that had nothing to do with Game Changers. And so they thought it was weird to have two books, one called Changers, one called Game Changers. And though I've never changed the title before, I went with Game World because I thought it was less cliched. I thought it really captured what it was about. I wanted people to think they were going to a whole world, and just like a whole fantasy world. So that's why I came up with the name. How much time do we have, by the way? Okay, great. How about right there?
Are they going to make a movie about your book?
One more time?
Would they ever make a movie about your book?
Yeah. You know, I hope they do make a movie of the book. I don't know yet. It hasn't been sold to the movies. I've had other books sold to the movies. My first book, which was called My Favorite War, was sold to HBO to make it into a movie. But someone else wrote the script. They hated the script, and they never made the movie. My other book, one of my other books, Before the Legend of the Rise of Bob Marley, that was sold to the movies to make a documentary, and that never happened either. Though they ended up making a documentary about Bob Marley that I worked on, but it wasn't based on my book. And very recently, the book Aaliyah, 10 years after it was first published, that was sold to be a TV movie. So I'm hoping that happens very soon. But you never know. Hollywood is odd. They buy things, they try to make them, they don't make them. You know, you write the books to write the books. You don't sort of write them, hopefully there'll be a movie later. If it happens, fine, but it's all about the books and not about the movies or Hollywood.
It should definitely be a movie. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you, I appreciate it. Yes?
Are you going to make more books like this?
Yeah, I probably will make more books like this. I probably will do a sequel to this book at some point. I'm working on a book for adults next. So that's what I'm working on next, but I'll probably do a sequel. So my fantasy books tend to lend themselves to sequels. There are more things to explore in this whole world. Oh, back there. Yes, you.
Will you ever make a prequel to this book? Because there are some parts of the book that were kind of fuzzy, but they had a lot of influences on stuff that happened in this book. Will you make a sequel to explain what happened before?
Yeah, that's a great point. You know, will I make a prequel to this book to sort of clear up some fuzzy things? You know, when you're writing a book like this, one thing I did is the book was much longer, and but I wanted to make it fast. I wanted to make it read quickly because I found that when kids were reading it, you know, you kids are busy. You've got things to do. You've got places to go. You've got teams you're part of. You got after-school programs. You got Xbox to play. And so, if the book doesn't read quickly, people put it down. So I went through the book really carefully and cut out everything I thought you could cut out to make the book read quickly, even if it made some things a little bit fuzzy, just to sort of keep the plot moving ahead. So there probably is a lot that cut out that could make a prequel, but I wanted the book to be as fast-moving and as fast-paced as possible, so it'd be exciting, like a video game, and not like something that people feel like they have to slog through. Because I love the Harry Potter books, for example, but I think some of them could have been a little bit shorter. And sometimes it's fun to have long books, and I love long books, but it's always good to sort of edit them so they're focused. Yes?
Are you ever gonna create a video game called Jamaican?
That's a great idea. Before the book came out, I was actually approached by a couple of software designers and heard about it and say, we could do some sort of game online, sort of like Jamaica. But number one, it seemed like it was going to cost too much money to sort of develop it. And number two, I thought it's maybe more fun to have the book, to have the game exist in your head and not someplace in reality. So right now, the only way to play Jamaica is in your head and by reading the book, and there's no actual Jamaica game you can actually play. How about back there, the guy back there?
Top 3 Bob Marley songs.
My top 3 Bob Marley songs. That's a very good, I think Bob Marley's a great artist. The songs always change. It's like a playlist. It's always changing. Like today, I might say a couple songs that might change, but I think probably up there would be Redemption Song. It's a great song. I think Get Up, Stand Up. That's another terrific song. And maybe So Just Say. It's another song I would say is a terrific song. Yes. My best accomplishment in being an author. And I think my greatest accomplishment in being an author is actually writing a book that my son read all the way through. In fact, he read it all the way through, made me feel really good that I really accomplished. I didn't care if I'm glad everyone else read it, but I was sort of happy that at least I got one reader, my son, to sort of finish the book, and also my daughter. So just getting them into the book. My son read it first, my daughter would get a little bit older, read through it, and just seeing them reading and getting something out of it, that made me feel good as an author. Back there.
Who's your favorite author?
Who is my favorite author? I have lots of favorite authors. It's hard to just name one, but among my favorite authors is the book Roots. Is Alex Haley. Alex Haley was a great historian, an author, wrote a book called Roots. Anyone heard of Roots? Yeah, Roots is a great book. It came out when I was a kid. When I was a kid, people didn't talk about slavery that much. It was almost like something people put away and didn't want to discuss openly. And he wrote this book called Roots. It's all about tracing his family all the way back to slave times and then all the way back to Africa. And that was a very powerful book that got Americans thinking about their roots, thinking about their family, thinking about slavery, thinking about the Middle Passage, the ship voyage from Africa to America, and realizing that we have these roots in Africa that we should acknowledge and talk about. So I love that book. I love him as an author, and he's very influential on me. Yes?
Okay. Did you get frustrated when the kids would give you kind of like a bad opinion about the book? Would you get frustrated trying to teach it?
Okay, the question is, would I get frustrated when kids gave me bad opinions about my book? And you know what? I didn't get frustrated because I thought, because the thing about kids, kids, you're not coming into the book with an agenda. They're not trying to hurt you. They're just honestly saying, this book's terrible. Do something about it. Make it better. And so when people say that, they're only trying to help you. And so in the end, it made the book stronger. It made my work better. And so I appreciated their honesty. Because adults, they'll read a book and say, this is fantastic, because they don't want to hurt your feelings. And that doesn't help you. So I think it's a good thing to remember. If anyone ever asks you for your critique and your review of their work that they're trying to improve, be honest with them if they're looking for honesty, because that will only help them. Anyone ever watch Simon Cowell on like the X Factor and those kind of things? Yes. People show up there and they sing these songs and they're terrible. And you're like, don't you know you're terrible? Because no one has ever given them an honest review and said, you know what, you can't sing. You shouldn't do this in public. Do something else. Take up drawing, take up lacrosse, but don't be a singer. And so, if you're honest with your friends in a nice way, in a caring way, and it comes from a place of love, then criticism really has its place. It can really help people, so you don't end up like someone on the X Factor. One more question. It's going to be a great question. I need a good question to finish this all out. How about back there? Yes. Yes.
Why do you parts of Game of so bad?
One more time? Well, I'll answer your question. Let me hear her question first, though.
Why do you, would there be a parts of Game of?
There might be. I might work on that soon. But it's a good question. Thank you for asking. How about you?
Why did you decide to add like suspense to the story by making Dylan's mother like the same thing?
But why did I decide to make Dylan's mother the center of the game? That's a very good question. Partly because my mother and father were so important to my life. In terms of teaching me and raising me right. And I thought it was very important to sort of put in this whole fantasy world, lots of things going on, monsters, creatures, competitions, sort of have this parental figure at the center of it all, sort of drawing people in. So I felt like that was something that sort of reflected my own life and would be a cool thing to do. I think we're going to end it there.
Yes,
Hey, I want to say one thing. Your questions were fantastic. These are the best questions I've ever had. So really, give yourselves a hand for those questions.